Dr. Watson has long since grown accustomed to the peculiar manner in which the most singular events of London life contrive to present themselves at the very moment when his own existence appears most prosaic. Yet even he, who had seen rivers of crimson in the snow at Lauriston Gardens and watched death stalking in the lonely country houses of England, would, in later years, look back upon the affair of the door that opened without a house as one of the strangest beginnings to any case that ever came under his friend's observation. It commenced, as so many of our adventures did, with a fog. London lay under one of those yellow-grey mists which hang low over the city and turn every gas lamp into a blurred halo. The air was damp and chill. Horses coughed in the streets, and the cries of newspaper boys came muffled as though through layers of wool. Along the river, the lamps of the embankment shone weakly, each a pale and sickly eye peering into an ocean of darkness. On such a night, a man of modest habits and regular routine has no greater ambition than to reach his fireside with the least possible delay. Mr. Tobias Green, clerk in the respectable banking house of Finsbury and Sons, was precisely such a man. He was small, neat, conscientious, and had lived his 48 years without once attracting the attention of either the police or the fashionable world. It was, therefore, a curious stroke of fate that it should be this inoffensive gentleman who first beheld the phenomenon which later filled every newspaper in London. He had left his office in Lombard Street at 6:30, as he did every evening save Saturday, and had taken an omnibus as far as Holborn. From there he preferred to walk, both for the sake of his health and to save the small coin that even so short a cab journey would demand. His lodging was in a narrow turning off Bloomsbury, a humble but orderly establishment much patronized by clerks of his own sort. This particular night the fog lay thickest about Holborn Viaduct, and Mr. Green, with his umbrella tucked under his arm and his thin overcoat buttoned up to his chin, went picking his way along the pavement with more than his usual caution. The lamps were but dim smears in the murk. Carriages loomed abruptly and rumbled past like dark phantoms. Twice he was jostled by hurried passers-by who muttered apologies and vanished into the mist. It was near the corner of Devonshire Place, one of those short, ill-lit streets which lead northward from Holborn, that Mr. Green first became conscious of something unusual. There was a lull in the traffic. For a brief spell the muffled city noises receded, and he found himself walking in an eerie pocket of quiet. It seemed to him that even the fog was thicker here, forming a wall of yellow-grey through which he could scarcely see a yard ahead. He later reported a sensation, half fancy, half instinct, that he was not alone. "Is someone there?" he called, peering into the swirling gloom. There was no answer, but he heard a sound, a faint scrape as of a shoe upon stone, followed by a dull thud. It might have been nothing more than a tradesman shutting up his shop. Yet there was something furtive and abrupt about it which caused the little clerk to hesitate. He took a few steps forward and then stopped in astonishment. There, before him on the pavement, stood a door. It was not set into any building, for the nearest wall on either side lay a good 12 feet away. Nor was it part of some tradesman's cart or carpenter's load. The thing rose stark and solitary from the slabs of the pavement, framed in its own narrow casing of dark-painted wood, as complete and ordinary a front door as might be found in 100 London houses, save that it had no house behind it. In the yellow fog-light, Mr. Green could observe that it was of solid construction, with 4 panels and a brass knocker in the shape of a lion's head. A frosted glass fanlight surmounted it, though there was no visible source of illumination beyond. The door stood squarely upon the pavement with no visible supports, and the stones beneath it appeared unbroken. Had he been a man of stronger nerves or more romantic temperament, he might have suspected some practical joke or theatrical contrivance. As it was, he simply stared, his mouth open, his breath turning to steam in the chill air. He was still standing thus when the impossible thing occurred. The door, this door with no threshold, no stoop, no wall to enclose it, opened. It did not swing inward upon hinges set in brick or timber. Rather, it moved as though a hidden hand had drawn it back from within a house that was not there. The brass knob turned, the panel edged inward, revealing nothing. Absolute blackness lay beyond, so utter that it made the surrounding fog seem luminous by comparison. Mr. Green uttered a small, involuntary cry. For a long heartbeat, I am told, no living creature moved in that little patch of pavement. The street was almost deserted. The fog swirled. The faint glow of a distant gas lamp made a halo on the frosted glass above the door. Then, from within that impenetrable darkness, a figure stepped out. It was a man, tall and cloaked, his face obscured by the turned-up collar of his coat and the low brim of his hat. He moved with swiftness and a certain desperate urgency. In one gloved hand he carried a small package, wrapped in brown paper and bound with string. The other hand pushed the strange door wider as he emerged into the fog. For an instant his head turned, and Mr. Green caught a gleam of eyes, sharp, restless, and, as he later insisted to the police, full of a hunted terror. Then the man saw him. They were no more than 3 yards apart. Mr. Green, frozen between fascination and fear, could do nothing but return that wild, startled stare. The stranger's lips moved, as if he formed a word, but no sound reached the clerk's ears. Suddenly, in a motion both swift and violent, the man thrust the little parcel into the inner pocket of his coat, turned sharply on his heel, and darted into the fog. "Stop!" cried Mr. Green, though he had neither the courage nor the agility to pursue. "Sir! I say, sir!" The only answer was the receding echo of hasty footsteps and the distant rumble of wheels. For several seconds more Mr. Green remained rooted to the spot. Then with a start he realized that the strange door still stood half open beside him, its black interior yawning. Some impulse of curiosity tugged at him. He took a tentative step forward and, stretching out a trembling hand, pushed at the panel as though to see whether it was solid. To his touch it seemed substantial enough. The hinges creaked faintly as it swung wider, and the brass lion's head was cold beneath his fingers. Yet beyond there was nothing but that same unnatural darkness. No floorboards, no tiles, no glimmer of interior walls, merely a depth that swallowed the feeble light of the street and gave nothing back. Even in his confusion, Mr. Green was not entirely devoid of sense. The tales of London life are full of stories of gullible men lured into traps by strange contrivances. He had no intention of stepping over that unseen threshold. Instead, with the instinctive gesture of a respectable man confronted with something indecent, he seized the edge of the door and pushed it to. It closed with a soft but definite click. He stood listening. There was no sound from within, no bolt shot, no chain rattled. The door remained shut, a solid, ordinary barrier of painted wood, standing absurdly upon bare stone. It occurred to him then that such an apparition must be reported. The nearest constable would surely be glad of the opportunity to deal with so extraordinary a matter. With one last uneasy glance at the lonely door, Mr. Green turned and hurried back towards Holborn, his heart beating fast. He had not gone 20 paces when a cry arose behind him. It was a shout of surprise and horror, taken up and echoed by other voices. Mr. Green spun about. Through the fog he could see several figures gathering near the place he had just quitted. The indistinct forms of a costermonger and a pair of errand boys loomed out of the murk, their exclamations thick with alarm. "What is it?" cried Mr. Green, hurrying back. "What's happened?" "Lord help us!" gasped the costermonger, standing a little aside and pointing. "Look there, sir, on the pavement!" The little clerk followed the line of his shaking finger and recoiled. The door was gone. Where, but a few minutes before, the strange edifice had stood, there now lay a man. He was sprawled upon his back across the cold stones, his arms flung wide, his face turned up to the yellow sky with a terrible, fixed expression. His hat had rolled some distance away. The collar of his coat was pulled askew. A dark stain was spreading slowly beneath his shoulders, seeping into the cracks between the paving stones. He was, beyond any doubt, quite dead. Mr. Green stared, his head swimming. The costermonger crossed himself. One of the boys let out a low whistle, followed by an awed "Crikey!" A whistle of another kind pierced the air, the shrill, authoritative note of a constable's pipe. Within minutes, the foggy stillness of Devonshire Place was transformed into a scene of considerable commotion. A policeman pushed his way through the little knot of bystanders, followed shortly afterwards by another. Questions were shouted, names and addresses demanded. Mr. Green, stumbling and stammering, tried to explain about the door. "A door, you say?" repeated the constable, with the sceptical air of a man who has heard many improbable tales while on duty. "Standing alone in the middle of the pavement?" Yes, I assure you, officer, it was there not 10 minutes past. A complete door with a knocker and fanlight and all, but without so much as a brick behind it. I saw it open. A man came out from nowhere, as you might say." The constable sniffed, his moustache bristling. "You saw this gentleman here come out of your magic door, did you?" he asked, jerking a thumb towards the corpse. "No," cried Mr. Green. No, it was another man entirely, taller than this one and wrapped in a greatcoat. He carried a parcel." "A parcel, eh? And where might that be now?" Mr. Green looked helplessly from the dead man to the pavement around him. There was no sign of any wrapped bundle, only the corpse, the spreading pool beneath him, and the blurred shapes of the onlookers shifting in the mist. I don't know," he faltered. "He had it with him when he left the door. Then he ran off into the fog. I swear to you, officer, that is what I saw. The door vanished while my back was turned." The constable exchanged a glance with his fellow, an expression of resigned patience crossing his ruddy features. "Very good, sir," he said at last. "We shall take your statement at the station. In the meantime, don't you go filling anyone's head with tales of vanishing doors and such like. There's been a murder here, that's plain enough, and the Yard'll want facts, not fairy stories." "A murder!" chorused the bystanders, delighted and horrified in equal measure. "Looks like it, don't it?" muttered the costermonger. "Just his luck in this fog." In that moment, Mr. Green's gaze fell once more upon the dead man. For all the horror of the scene, there was something about the arrangement of the body that troubled him. The right hand was clenched tightly upon nothing. The left was flung out towards the street. The eyes stared upwards, and upon the pale lips there lingered an expression that was not so much fear as astonishment. "I tell you," he ventured, though his voice shook, "when I left this spot there was no one here, only that door. The man who stepped out of it was alive and very much in haste. How can this gentleman have appeared here, dead, in the space of a few minutes, with no one seeing or hearing anything?" "That'll be enough, sir," said the constable firmly. "You've given your account. Inspector'll sort the rest of it. Now then, stand back, all of you. Give us room. London, which takes its tragedies and marvels with equal appetite, devoured the story whole when the morning papers appeared. Headings such as Mysterious Death in the Fog and Strange Occurrence in Holborn were to be read at every street corner. One enterprising journal, not content with the bare facts, chose to embroider them with lurid phrases about a door to death and a phantom portal in the night. It was a matter of hours only before a neatly folded newspaper bearing such a headline came to rest upon the breakfast table of 221B Baker Street, where Sherlock Holmes, consulting detective, sat cross-legged in his chair, his keen grey eyes already scanning the extraordinary account. Dr. Watson, seated opposite his friend at the breakfast table of Baker Street, had just broken the top of his egg when a low exclamation drew his gaze to the armchair by the fire. Holmes, with his dressing gown gathered about him and the long, thin lines of his face thrown into relief by the firelight, held the newspaper in both hands, but his eyes, half-closed and glittering, were no longer moving over the print. They were fixed upon a single column, and the faint, sardonic smile which I had come to associate with the scent of an interesting problem played about the corners of his mouth. "You have found something to interest you, Holmes?" I ventured. He did not at once reply, but his fingers tapped lightly upon the margin of the paper, a rapid, nervous drumming that I had learned to read as excitement under perfect control. "A curious world, Watson," he said at last. "To a dull man, this would be merely a tale of a corpse in the fog. To a slightly less dull one, it is a case of street violence, perhaps robbery. To an imaginative mind, it appears a ghost story." He raised the paper higher and glanced across it at me. "To a moderately intelligent medical man, it is no doubt an example of journalistic exaggeration." "And to you?" I asked. "To me, it is the overture to something rather singular. Pray, listen." He lowered the paper and read aloud the account which has already, no doubt, passed beneath the eyes of the public. The discovery of a man lying dead upon the pavement in Devonshire Place, the evidence of a respectable clerk who insisted that but minutes before a freestanding door had stood upon that very spot, and the implicit scepticism of the authorities regarding any such phenomenon. When he had finished, he folded the paper with a precision that contrasted oddly with the extravagance of the tale. "You see, Watson," he remarked, "the world persists in inventing ghosts when men are quite monstrous enough." "It is certainly an odd story," said I. "This door, if indeed there ever was such a thing, sounds like the nightmare of an architect. You think the witness is mistaken?" Holmes stretched his long legs towards the fire, his gaze wandering to the window where the pale winter light fell across the familiar clutter of our lodging. "Before I think, I observe," he answered. "At present we have but the newspaper's version of Mr. Tobias Green's observations. And you must never forget, my dear fellow, that between a fact and its report in the press there yawns an abyss as deep as the Thames at low tide. Still, certain points emerge." He lifted the paper once more and indicated the offending column with a lean forefinger. "Observe, first the respectability of the witness, a bank clerk of 20 years' standing, regular habits, no history of drink. Such a man does not, as a rule, hallucinate entire doors in the middle of public thoroughfares. Secondly, the constable speaks of a dark stain spreading beneath the deceased, from which we may infer considerable hemorrhage at the scene. Yet the witness is clear that when he left the spot there was neither man nor blood upon the pavement." "Then the body must have been brought there in the interval," I exclaimed. "Precisely. But how long an interval?" "But the account gives us the constable's estimate, not more than 10 minutes, for between the clerk's departure in search of a policeman and the raising of the alarm that brought him back. In 10 minutes, in a fog, a dead man may indeed be deposited. But there is another factor." He leaned forward, his eyes bright. "You remark the title they have given it? The Door to Death. It is vulgar, but not wholly inaccurate. The key fact of Mr. Green's testimony is not that a door stood upon the pavement, but that he saw a man emerge from it, alive and carrying a parcel, and that within minutes another man lay dead upon the same spot with no sign of the parcel. Then you attach importance to the parcel? "My dear Watson," said Holmes with a touch of impatience, "in a world where men do not usually materialize from solid wood, the one object they carry when performing such a feat becomes of some interest, does it not?" I laughed. "You will have it that the door was solid and the man real, then?" "I will have it that something stood where the corpse was later found, and that something afforded concealment or shelter to a living man for a period of time. Whether that something was a door, a crate, or a Punch and Judy show matters little at this stage. What is vital is that it was movable, that it vanished, and that the police are at present more concerned with questioning the witness than with finding whoever removed it." There came a sudden knock upon our own door, brisk and authoritative. Mrs. Hudson's step sounded in the passage, and a moment later she ushered in a familiar figure whose presence confirmed Holmes's anticipations of official blundering. Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard had aged but little in the years I had known him. His thin, ferret-like face and sharp eyes were as keen as ever, though there was perhaps a shade more grey at his temples. He removed his hat with a jerk and inclined his head briefly to me before turning his attention to Holmes. "Good morning, Mr. Holmes. I dare say you've seen the newspapers?" Holmes indicated the crumpled column. "Devonshire Place," he said. "A dead man, a vanished door, and a clerk with a too vivid imagination. You are in luck, Lestrade. You will be able to discredit at least one of the three." The inspector sniffed. "I don't deny it's a queer business, sir," he admitted. "But we've had enough of witnesses seeing things in the fog to last us the winter. They'll be saying they met Napoleon in Fleet Street next. Still, I thought it right to put the matter before you. There's pressure from above already. The deceased was not some common footpad." "Indeed?" Holmes's eyelids drooped half over his eyes. "His name is Arthur Penny, Mr. Arthur Charles Penny, a partner in the firm of Penny, Mordaunt and Leary, solicitors, with offices in Lincoln's Inn. A well-known man in the law, so they tell me. His body's lying now at the station in Holborn, awaiting the doctor and the coroner. No marks of robbery that we can see. Watch and chain, pocketbook with notes intact, signet ring on his finger. That's one reason I don't care for this street violence theory some of the papers are playing at." "And the wound?" I asked, my professional interest aroused. Lestrade glanced at me. "Right through the chest, Doctor. There was blood on the pavement. Enough to show it wasn't done somewhere else and the body brought thereafter. Our man Green may be flighty, but he's right about that much. The question is what happened in that 10 minutes before he came back with the constable. If you ask me, someone's taking advantage of the fog and a nervous witness to throw in a lot of nonsense about ghostly doors and vanishing parcels." Holmes steepled his fingers together. "You have Mr. Green in custody?" he inquired. "In a manner of speaking. We've taken his statement and asked him to remain in London for the inquest. He's lodging with a cousin not far from the bank. The man's as honest as the day is long, but easily flustered. I shouldn't wonder if he were to embroider his tale with every telling." "Then we should see him before the embroidery is complete," said Holmes. "You will admit, Lestrade, that, ghosts apart, the case is unusual. A respectable lawyer slain in a busy district, no attempt at robbery, a witness who sees him not at all, but sees something else in the precise spot where he later lies dead. I should like to view both the scene and the body." Lestrade's thin lips twitched. "I thought you'd say so, Mr. Holmes. The Yard is always glad of your observations. There's a cab waiting below." Holmes sprang up with an energy that belied his languid pose of a moment before. Your timing is excellent, Inspector. Watson, if you have finished your egg, your experience as a medical man may be of some value. Your hat and coat, my dear fellow. The game, as I believe the expression goes, is once more afoot. It is to the credit of my long association with him that I had my boots on almost as quickly as he. Within 5 minutes we had descended the 17 steps of Baker Street, exchanged a word with Mrs. Hudson, and were seated in the cab with Lestrade opposite and the cold December air cutting at our faces through the open window. The fog had thinned somewhat since the previous night, but it still hung in patches over the lower streets, so that we passed from comparative clarity into sudden swathes of yellow-grey, and out again into clearer air like a ship entering and leaving banks of mist upon the sea. Holmes sat silent, the collar of his coat turned up, his chin sunk, his eyes vacant to all outward appearance. Yet I, who knew the man, was aware that behind that mask his brain was already fitting the few facts we possessed into some tentative pattern. "Tell me, Lestrade," he said at last, without lifting his gaze from the blurred procession of shop fronts beyond the glass. "Had Mr. Penny any enemies?" The inspector gave a short laugh. "A man in his position, Mr. Holmes, is bound to have enemies. You don't deal with wills and lawsuits and business affairs for 30 years without putting someone's nose out of joint. But whether any of them hated him enough to stick a knife between his ribs in a public street is another matter. We've sent a man round to his offices. I'm on my way there after we've done with the scene and the body." "Have you ascertained where he was going when he met his death?" asked Holmes. "He dined with a client in the Strand last night, left him about 8:30, and was last seen alive walking alone towards Holborn. He lived in Russell Square." "So Devonshire Place would be on his way home." "A client?" said Holmes softly. "Do we know the name?" Lestrade consulted a notebook. "Sir Felix Warrender, Baronet of Warrender House, Bayswater." "Warrender," murmured Holmes. "I have met the name. A racing man, if I recall, and not overly burdened with scruples. An interesting circle is forming, Watson. A cautious banker, a murdered solicitor, and a baronet with a fondness for the turf. I fancy our door has opened into more than fog." The cab drew up with a jolt. Lestrade led the way, and we alighted into a street that had already begun to return to its usual aspect. The fog was a thin veil here, softening the outlines of the houses but no longer obscuring them. A faint crowd still lingered, contained at a distance by a uniformed constable. The man saluted as Lestrade approached and moved aside to admit us. "This is the place, sir," he said. "We've chalked the outline where the body lay, and I've told 'em to leave the stones be until you'd seen 'em." Holmes's eyes flashed a quick appreciation. "You have learned something from past experience, Constable," he remarked. "Pray do not let me detain you from your important task of preventing the public from interfering with the course of justice." With that, he stepped forward onto the cold grey flagstones of Devonshire Place, his gaze going at once to the faint, white chalk line traced upon the pavement, the last earthly boundary of Arthur Penny, while I, following close behind, felt that peculiar tightening of the nerves which always heralded the beginning of one of his singular investigations. Holmes moved with deliberate steps across the flagstones, his gaze taking in every detail of the pavement as though it were the page of some elaborate manuscript written for his eyes alone. I had seen him so engaged 100 times before, expression taut with concentration, senses sharpened to a razor's edge. But there was, on this particular morning, an added intensity, as though the impossible story of the vanished door had struck at some chord of intellectual curiosity deeper than usual. He knelt beside the chalk outline, fingertips brushing the stones just outside its boundary. "Note the direction of the blood flow, Watson," he murmured, without looking up. "It radiates outward, but only on 3 sides. What does that suggest to you?" "That his back lay against something," I answered, after bending to observe. "A wall, perhaps?" Holmes nodded, pleased, though not surprised. "Quite so, yet as you see, no wall stands within several feet of where Mr. Penny was found. Therefore something else was here, something tall, unmoving, and close behind him when he was struck, and removed immediately afterwards." "The door," I said under my breath. Holmes gave a soft, thoughtful hum. "Or an object mistaken for one. Even a crate would give much the same impression under fog and fear." Still, a door is what our witness perceived, and we must not discount his sincerity. Let us see whether the pavement will confess anything further. He pressed lightly upon the stone with one gloved hand, then leaned forward and removed the glove, placing his bare fingertips along the edge of a groove, so faint I might easily have missed it. "There, Watson. Run your hand across this line." I did so, and felt indeed a narrow indentation no wider than a pencil stroke, curving in a subtle arc across two paving stones. "A wheel mark," I suggested. "Not of a carriage," said Holmes. "Too shallow. But it is the precise depth and width of the wheel of a tradesman's dolly, one of those hand-carts used to move heavy crates or furniture. A cleverly disguised structure placed on such a cart could indeed be wheeled into position unnoticed in fog of that density." "And then wheeled away again," I added, glancing toward the street, which stretched away into a soft veil of morning mist. "Precisely," said he, "but that alone tells us little. What matters is timing. Whoever moved this contrivance must have been close at hand when Mr. Green departed. Either the murderer was already concealed behind it, or the object itself was integral to the plan." Lestrade, who had been watching Holmes's scrutiny with increasing impatience, now interjected. "You'll pardon me, Mr. Holmes, but it seems a stretch to imagine someone lugging a great door about London just to commit a murder. Most criminals use simpler means." Holmes straightened and dusted his knees with his handkerchief. "My dear Lestrade," he said dryly, "the very fact that you find the idea improbable is what recommends it to me. A simple murder would show simple signs. Here we have a witness who saw an impossible thing, a body appearing where moments before there was none, and the presence of a movable structure large enough to conceal two men. If you wish an ordinary crime, I fear you will be disappointed." Lestrade muttered something about Holmes's taste for theatricals, but he could not disguise the slight unease creeping into his expression. Holmes, meanwhile, turned his attention toward a narrow gutter that ran alongside the pavement. There, lodged against a drain cover, lay a small object glinting faintly in the pale light. Without hesitation, Holmes stooped and plucked it free. It was a sliver of glass, no more than a half-inch long, its edges sharp, its surface frosted as though from a lamp or window. Holmes held it up between thumb and forefinger. "This," he said, "did not come from any broken bottle. It is too thin, and the frosting is deliberate. Watson, does it remind you of anything?" I examined it carefully. "It resembles the fanlight glass above the kind of door Mr. G.T. Green described." "Just so." Holmes slipped it into a small envelope and tucked it into his pocket. Whether it belonged to a door, or merely something made to resemble a door, we shall see. But its presence is significant. He took a few steps backward, surveying the area as a whole. His eyes travelled from the chalk outline to the walls of the surrounding buildings, then down the length of the pavement. "We know the dead man fell here. The wound is frontal, so he faced his attacker. The weapon must have been long enough to pierce the chest at close quarters. A knife, yes, but likely a narrow one, with sufficient force to reach the heart before the victim could cry out." "And the parcel?" I pressed. Holmes tapped his temple. "The parcel worries me, Watson. A man carrying something small and valuable might be attacked for it." But our deceased had no such package. Therefore the parcel belonged to the other man Mr. Green saw, the one emerging from the door. If the parcel was removed when the door vanished, then it is likely connected to the motive itself. Lestrade folded his arms. "We've no evidence the two men had any connection." Holmes gave him a sharp look. "On the contrary, they share a connection of proximity, time, and location, unless you believe that two unrelated men chose the same moment to approach a ghostly door in a deserted street, one living and one dead, and that the dead one did so without ever passing Mr. Green. No, Lestrade, the connection between them is the very heart of the matter." His gaze drifted upward toward the blank windows overlooking the street. "Come, we have seen what we can here. It is time we examined the body." Lestrade led us back to the waiting cab, though Holmes's footsteps were less hurried than before. It was evident his thoughts were turning rapidly, like the cogs of some precise machine. As the cab rattled away, he folded his arms and closed his eyes, the faintest crease appearing between his brows. "Something is out of joint," he murmured. "A manufactured door, a fleeing man, a dead solicitor. But the order does not yet satisfy me." I refrained from interrupting his reverie. In such moments Holmes seemed to retreat inward, drawing stray impressions into a single, cohesive thread. When at last he opened his eyes, we had arrived at the Holborn station. A constable guided us down a narrow corridor toward a small, austere chamber, where the body of Arthur Penny lay covered by a sheet upon a metal table. Holmes motioned for the cloth to be lifted. The face revealed was that of a man in late middle age, refined features, clean-shaven jaw, greying hair at the temples. Yet it was the expression that commanded attention, as though the man's final moment had offered him not pain alone, but a glimpse of something utterly incomprehensible. His eyes, half open, retained the faintest glimmer of that astonishment which Mr. Green had described upon the living stranger's face, an echo of bafflement frozen in death. Holmes leaned in closer, studying every line, every shadow, with a detachment that was almost reverence for the truth buried within the features. "You see, Watson," he murmured, "this is not the expression of a man attacked from behind or struck by stealth. He faced his assailant, a person or thing he did not expect. Surprise is plain. Fear? Yes, but not immediate terror. Something puzzled him at the very brink of death." He glanced toward Lestrade, who stood stiffly by the door, arms crossed. "Has Dr. Ellery completed his preliminary examination?" "He has," replied Lestrade, producing a slip of paper. "Stab wound to the left of the sternum. Blade penetrated the heart. Death instantaneous." Holmes accepted the note and scanned it without comment. Then he bent to examine the wound itself. With careful hands he parted the shirt, revealing a narrow puncture just above the fourth rib, small, precise, and clean. "A slender blade," he said quietly. "Possibly triangular in section. A stiletto or a gentleman's dagger of Italian design, not common among London ruffians." "Then we're looking for a foreigner?" Lestrade asked. Holmes shot him a sidelong glance. "We are looking for someone who wished the death to be silent, but consider the depth and angle, straight in, without hesitation. This required accuracy and a steady hand. A professional might strike thus, so might a trained duelist. No drunken footpad delivers a blow like this." I stepped closer, my medical instincts stirred. Holmes noticed the slight abrasion along the ribs, just beneath the puncture. It suggests the blade scraped bone as it entered. "Excellent, Watson," Holmes replied. "And such a strike, delivered with precision, suggests intent rather than improvisation. Mr. Penny's murder was planned." "Planned?" Lestrade repeated. But how does the door enter into it? No man plans to build a makeshift house in the street merely to kill a solicitor. Holmes straightened, clasping his hands behind his back. That, Inspector, was precisely the question before us. Why create the impression of a door? Why disguise whatever structure stood here? Why conceal oneself within it? Why flee with a parcel? His voice sharpened. Answer those questions and we have the murderer. He motioned toward the dead man's clothing. Watson, would you examine his pockets? I complied, gently searching each compartment. His wallet held several banknotes, a calling card, and a neatly written engagement list. In another pocket lay a fountain pen, spectacles in a silver case, and several folded legal documents, mundane papers relating to a property dispute in Sussex. Nothing unusual. Then my fingers touched something stiff and narrow in the inner breast pocket. I drew it out, a single envelope, sealed. Lestrade leaned forward. What's that? A letter, I said. Unopened. Addressed to Mr. Penny himself. Holmes took it eagerly, though he did not break the seal at once. He held the envelope to the light, inspecting the thickness, the weight, the watermark. Note the edges, Watson. They are faintly smudged, and here, do you see? A single grain of something adhered to the glue. He scraped it off with a fingernail and examined it closely. Dust, he murmured. Fine, pale, plaster dust, perhaps. Odd to find on an envelope carried in the inner pocket. But what does the letter say? Lestrade demanded. Holmes fixed him with a look of mild reproach. Inspector, your impatience is the enemy of deduction. Nevertheless, we shall read it. With a deliberate hand, he slit the envelope and removed a small sheet of folded paper. There were only 2 lines written upon it. Holmes read them aloud. You will find the truth behind the open door. Come alone. Midnight, Devonshire Place. Signed only with the letter M. A stillness descended upon the room. Even the constable by the wall shifted uneasily. Lestrade let out a low whistle. Well, that settles where he was going. Someone lured him there. Holmes refolded the note and returned it to its envelope. The letter was written in haste. The hand is practiced, but uneven here. See the pressure on the downward strokes. The ink is of a cheap chemical composition, not typical of a solicitor's correspondence, and the anonymity suggests the writer believed either the name would be recognized or that it must remain concealed. You think the murderer wrote it? I asked. I think, Holmes replied, that whoever wrote this letter intended Mr. Penny to arrive alone and vulnerable. Whether the writer wielded the knife or merely delivered him to the killer, we shall learn in time. Lestrade rubbed his chin. And what about this truth behind the open door? What truth could that possibly be? Holmes gave a faint smile. Exactly the one we seek. He turned abruptly. Lestrade, we must speak with Mr. Tobias Green immediately. Every minute that man spends thinking about this matter will distort his recollection further. We require him while the memory is fresh. He's still in London, Lestrade replied. I can have him brought to the station. Do so at once, Holmes said, and ensure his route here does not take him through any newspaper stands. We cannot afford further contamination of his impressions. Lestrade hurried out, barking orders as he went. Holmes stood motionless for several moments, staring down at the corpse as though the silent lips might yet yield some whisper of truth. Then he turned to me. Watson, consider this. A respectable solicitor receives a cryptic summons. He obeys. A disguised structure awaits him in the fog. Within it, or behind it, is a man carrying a parcel. That man flees. Penny dies. The structure vanishes. What we have is not murder alone, but staging. Someone has gone to considerable lengths, not merely to kill, but to create a scene, one both witnessed and confounding. "But why stage it?" I asked. "Why not simply kill the man in some quiet alley?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Because, my dear Watson, the murderer needed the death to be discovered at once, and under circumstances that would confuse every mind but one." He paused. "The parcel is the crux. Until we know its contents, we cannot understand the motive." A knock sounded at the door. Lestrade stepped in. "Green is on his way, Holmes. Should be here within 10 minutes. "Excellent. Watson, I want his account from the first instant to the last. Not what he thinks he saw, but what he saw. Observe him closely. A nervous man often reveals more through hesitation than speech." Holmes began to pace slowly, each step measured, each movement deliberate. "For now," he said, "we have a dead solicitor, an elusive stranger, and a vanishing door. But when Mr. Green enters this room, Watson, we shall begin to connect the shadows." I felt a shiver, not of cold, but of that particular anticipation that accompanies the moment Holmes first tightens the net around the unknown. The investigation was no longer a puzzle of oddities, it was the beginning of a revelation. And as the footsteps approached along the corridor, I knew instinctively that whatever Mr. Tobias Green had to say next would carry us deeper into the heart of the mystery than any clue yet found. The door opened with a faint creak, and Mr. Tobias Green stepped hesitantly inside, clutching his hat with both hands as though it might shield him from whatever horrors memory threatened to resurrect. He was a slight man, as the newspapers had described, with anxious eyes that darted from Lestrade to myself, and finally to Holmes, upon whom they rested with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Holmes greeted him with a courteous inclination of the head, calm, reassuring, and yet piercing in a way that compelled honesty. "Mr. Green," he said pleasantly, "we thank you for coming at such short notice. Pray be seated. You are in no danger here. We require merely your recollection, clear, precise, and without embellishment." The poor fellow swallowed hard and perched on the edge of a chair, twisting his hat brim. I wish to be of use, sir," he stammered. "But the officers seem to think that I had imagined it all." Holmes seated himself opposite him, steepling his long fingers beneath his chin. "Rest assured, Mr. Green, your testimony is of the utmost importance. Let us begin with the simplest matter. You were walking home through the fog when you first noticed something unusual. Describe that moment exactly as it occurred in your own words. Do not concern yourself with interpretation." Green nodded repeatedly as though bolstering his nerve. It was terribly thick, the fog. I could hardly see ahead. Then I heard a sound, a sort of scrape, like a shoe upon stone, and I stopped. The street was empty, yet I felt someone nearby. Holmes's gaze sharpened. "The scrape came before you saw the door?" "Yes, sir." "Good, continue." "I walked forward a few steps, very slowly, and then I saw it. A door, just standing there on the pavement like it had no right to be." His voice quavered. "It was solid enough, painted dark green with a brass knocker and a little frosted window above." "The fanlight," Holmes murmured almost to himself. "Frosted, as you said in your statement." "Yes, sir, it was exactly that. I thought perhaps it was some prank, or that builders had left it there by mistake." "And then," prompted Holmes. Green took a deep, shaking breath. "And then the knob turned. The door opened inward. But there was no house, no light. Only blackness." His voice fell to a whisper, and his eyes flicked nervously toward the covered form on the table. "The man," Holmes said gently. "Tell us about him." "He stepped out quickly," Green said. "Tall, wearing a long coat, collar up, hat down. I could not see his face clearly, only his eyes. "Frightened, sir. Terribly frightened." He held a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "Describe the size." "About the length of a hand, no larger." Holmes nodded. "And when he saw you?" He froze, looked right at me as though I had startled him. Then he stuffed the parcel into his coat and ran, disappeared into the fog. "And the door?" Holmes prompted. Green's hands tightened convulsively on his hat. "I closed it when he left. I touched it. It was solid, real. Then I turned to find a constable, but when I returned—" His voice trailed off. And Lestrade interjected gruffly, "When he returned, the door was gone and the body was there. We know the rest." Holmes lifted a hand for silence. "One moment, Inspector, Mr. Green. When you closed the door, did you hear any sound from the other side? Any shifting? Footsteps?" "No, sir. Only the click of the latch." Holmes leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "And when the man passed you, did you notice anything unusual about his movement? His gait? Did he limp, hesitate, or favour one side?" Green blinked rapidly. "Now that you mention it, sir, he moved oddly, not a limp exactly, but as though carrying something heavy under his coat. Not the parcel, it was too small, but something else, something weighing him down." Holmes exchanged a quick glance with me, then rose abruptly and began pacing the small chamber. "You see, Watson," he said softly, "a concealed weight, a parcel removed, a door-like structure portable enough to vanish, and a dead man whose pockets hold nothing but innocuous papers." Lestrade frowned. "What are you getting at, Holmes?" Holmes stopped, turned back toward Mr. Green, and his voice softened. "One more question, Mr. Green. Most important. The man's coat, was it smooth, or did you notice any bulges? Any unusual outline beneath the fabric?" Green closed his eyes, concentrating. Yes, I did notice something. His left side, the coat stuck out a bit there, as though something long and flat was strapped beneath it." Holmes inhaled sharply, as though a vital piece had clicked into place. "That will do perfectly," he said. "You have been remarkably helpful, Mr. Green. You may go with Inspector Lestrade, who will see to any further formalities." Relief washed across the clerk's face like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. He rose, bowed awkwardly, and followed Lestrade to the door. Before departing, he turned back toward Holmes. You believe me, sir, about the door?" Holmes gave him a rare, reassuring smile. "I believe," he said, "that you saw precisely what you were meant to see." When the door closed behind them, Holmes stood silent for a long moment. Then he turned to me with a look of keen exhilaration. "Watson, the shape of the crime begins to form. Consider. A man emerges carrying a parcel. He flees before the murder is discovered. Another man, Penny, is summoned to the same spot by a mysterious message. A disguised structure conceals the killer until the appointed moment." I frowned. "But the murderer stabbed Penny from the front. Why would Penny willingly approach someone hiding behind that structure?" Holmes tapped the envelope containing the cryptic letter. "Because he expected to meet someone he trusted or feared. A single letter, M, can signify many names." He walked toward the table where the dead man lay. "And now," he murmured, "we must go to Lincoln's Inn. If Mr. Penny had an enemy, a desperate client, or a dangerous partner, we shall find evidence of it there." As he gathered his coat and hat, his eyes glinted with the fire of deduction. "For the parcel, Watson, the mysterious parcel the stranger carried, is not merely important. It is central. Something was taken from within that structure before the murder occurred. Something so valuable or so dangerous that the killer struck down a solicitor of standing to conceal it. And you think the partners at Penny's firm may know what it was?" "If they do not," said Holmes, they will know who might. Outside, the mid-morning fog had begun to thin, but enough remained to blur the edges of London's great legal district as we made our way toward Lincoln's Inn. Holmes walked briskly, his mind clearly advancing 3 steps ahead of us, weaving Green's account with the letter, the wound, the vanished structure. And as the solemn facades of the inn emerged from the mist like grey sentinels, Holmes spoke without slowing. "Watson, prepare yourself, for we are about to meet men who dealt daily in secrets, and one of those secrets has just cost a man his life." The courtyard of Lincoln's Inn lay hushed beneath a thinning veil of mist, its ancient archways and solemn facades emerging like grey monuments to centuries of English law. Clerks moved briskly between offices, their breath forming pale clouds in the cold air. Barristers in dark coats strode with purposeful steps, their faces set in the gravity of their profession. Yet even amid this ordered bustle, an undercurrent of tension pervaded the place, as though whispers of Arthur Penny's death had already seeped into the very stones. Holmes paused at the base of a worn stone stairway leading to the offices of Penny, Mordaunt, and Leary. He surveyed the windows above, tall, narrow, many half-shuttered, as if taking the measure of the lives conducted within them. "Observe, Watson," he murmured. "Old institutions such as these have a way of accumulating secrets as dust gathers upon their ledgers. One must brush carefully, lest the whole edifice collapse prematurely." We ascended the steps, and Holmes rapped smartly upon the varnished oak door. It was opened by a young clerk, pale of face and startled of eye, who appeared almost relieved at the sight of us. "Gentlemen, yes, of course, you are expected. Mr. Leary asked that you be shown in at once." He ushered us through an antechamber lined with shelves of deeds and bundles of correspondence tied in precise order. The very air smelled of paper, ink, and a faint note of disquiet. Beyond, an inner door opened into a larger office, where 2 men stood beside a heavy desk strewn with documents. The first, whom I took to be Mr. Leary, was a thin, spare fellow of middle age, clean-shaven, his hair brushed meticulously back from a narrow forehead. His face bore the unmistakable marks of sleeplessness. The second, Mr. Mordaunt, was older, broad-shouldered, with a mane of greying hair, and a manner that conveyed both authority and deep unease. They bowed in greeting, though it was Mr. Leary who spoke. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, your presence is greatly appreciated. We were informed by Inspector Lestrade that our partner's death was under circumstances requiring your expertise." Holmes inclined his head. "We wish only to establish the truth. My condolences for your loss. I understand Mr. Penny left your office yesterday evening?" Mordaunt answered in a low, resonant voice. "He did, at his customary hour. He dined with a client later in the night, I believe. We heard nothing more until the Yard called this morning." Holmes studied the man keenly. "You were fond of him?" "Fond?" Mordaunt exhaled heavily. "Arthur Penny was the steadiest pillar of this firm. He carried more than his share of burdens." His voice tightened. "And made no enemies that I knew of." Holmes's fingers tapped lightly upon his walking stick, a sign of quickening interest. "None that you knew of, perhaps. Yet a man in his profession might encounter discord of various sorts, clients displeased, opponents embittered, associates resentful." Leary shifted uncomfortably. "There have been no quarrels within the firm, I assure you." "Then you will not object," said Holmes, "to my asking whether Mr. Samuel Penny had recently undertaken any unusual case? Something delicate, perhaps risky, a matter that might invite hostility." A strained silence followed. Leary's gaze flicked toward Mordaunt. It was the latter who finally answered. There is one affair. I had hoped it was unrelated. Arthur undertook the matter personally and insisted it required discretion. Holmes's expression hardened into razor focus. Pray continue. It concerned a document, Mordaunt said, lowering his voice as though the walls themselves might eavesdrop. A will, though not one drawn by our firm. It was entrusted to Arthur for safekeeping and examination. Holmes leaned slightly forward. Why was the document in question? Because, Mordaunt replied, its validity was in dispute. The original testament of a certain Mr. Alistair Warrender, father to Sir Felix Warrender, with whom Arthur dined last evening. I started. Holmes did not. Indeed, he said quietly. The baronet again? Yes, said Mordaunt. There were concerns that the will presently being executed was not the last one written by the deceased father. A later document, differing significantly in its bequests, was said to exist. Arthur had been asked to verify its authenticity. Holmes's voice was crisp. By whom? Leary answered now in a half-whisper. By a cousin of Sir Felix, Miss Amelia Warrender. Holmes absorbed that name without outward reaction, yet I saw the subtle brightening of his eyes. Continue. Miss Warrender believed her uncle had written a new will shortly before his death, one leaving a substantial portion of the estate to her and several charities. But the will held by Sir Felix leaves nearly the entire estate to him alone. Leary hesitated. Miss Warrender claimed to have seen the revised will once, but when she later inquired after it, she was told no such document existed. And this alleged revised will, Holmes said, came into Mr. Penny's possession? For a brief time, Mordaunt admitted. Miss Warrender found something, a parchment folded within an old portfolio of her uncle's papers. She brought it to Arthur yesterday morning. He would not discuss the contents until he had examined it thoroughly. And where is this document now? Mordaunt's face tightened. We do not know. It is not in our office. Arthur must have taken it with him. Holmes went still. A silence swelled between us, heavy with implications. Watson, he said at last, where do you perceive the pattern? I swallowed. A contested will, were a document vanishing, a man seen carrying a parcel of that size. Precisely. Holmes turned back to the partners. Mr. Penny was murdered because of that document. Someone feared what he had learned. Mordaunt's hands clenched. You cannot know that. Holmes's voice was like steel. The parcel seen in the fugitive's hand matched the dimensions of a folded legal document. That man fled with something of significance. A second man, your partner, was lured to the scene and stabbed, and the structure used in the killing was designed to conceal movement until the instant the deed was done. He paced once, sharply. The murderer created an illusion, a door without a house, to mislead any witness who might stumble upon it. And someone did stumble upon it. Fortunately for us, his account was accurate enough. Leary looked pale as a parchment. But who would do such a thing? Holmes stopped pacing. That, gentlemen, is my next question. Let us consider motives. Who stands to lose by the discovery of a new will? Sir Felix, whispered Leary. Sir Felix Warrender, Holmes repeated softly. A man with debts, a reputation for wages, and an estate he could ill afford to lose. Mordaunt stepped forward. Sir Felix is no murderer. Holmes's gaze sliced toward him. Let us not confuse gentlemanly manners with moral restraint. Men have killed for far less than an inheritance. He turned away, then added, But we shall not assume guilt. Sir Felix must be questioned, and Miss Amelia Warrender as well. A knock sounded at the chamber door. The young clerk entered again, looking uncertain. Begging your pardon, sirs, but "A lady is here asking for Mr. Penny." Holmes and I exchanged a charged glance. "Her name?" Holmes demanded. "Miss Amelia Warrender." Holmes exhaled sharply, not in surprise but in confirmation. "Show her in at once." As the clerk withdrew, Holmes whispered to me, "Watson, we are now at the heart of this affair. Stand prepared, for I suspect that with Miss Warrender's arrival, the true battle of wits begins, and the hidden threads of this dark tapestry will start to unravel." Miss Amelia Warrender entered the room with the quiet composure of a woman accustomed to maintaining dignity under strain. Yet there was no mistaking the tremor in her gloved hands or the pallor of her cheeks. Her dark travelling coat was dusted with mist, her veil slightly askew, signs that she had come in haste, perhaps in distress. When her gaze fell upon the partners, and then upon Holmes and myself, a flicker of apprehension crossed her features. "Mr. Leary, Mr. Mordaunt," she began breathlessly. "Forgive my intrusion, but I was told Mr. Penny was here. I must speak with him. It is urgent, most urgent." Holmes bowed with quiet courtesy. "Miss Warrender, I am Sherlock Holmes. I fear I must be the one to deliver difficult news. Mr. Penny died last night." For a moment she did not move, as though her ears refused admission of the words. Then the colour drained entirely from her face, and she caught at the back of a chair. "Dead," she whispered. "Mr. Penny. Murdered?" Holmes stepped forward to offer support, though she steadied herself before he touched her. Her eyes, grey and clear beneath the veil, met his with a sudden, piercing intensity. "You believe he was killed," she said quietly, almost accusingly. Then it is because of the will. It must be. It began the moment I placed it in his hands." Holmes exchanged a brief glance with me, a wordless affirmation that we had indeed reached the turning point of the investigation. "Miss Warrender," he said gently, "did you give Mr. Penny the testament you discovered among your uncle's papers?" "Yes," she replied in a strained whisper. "Yesterday morning. It was sealed when I found it. The handwriting was unmistakably my uncle's. I begged Mr. Penny to examine it discreetly." Leary's voice broke in softly. "Miss Warrender, what led you to believe the will currently in use was not the last your uncle wrote?" She hesitated, and her composure cracked. "My uncle, Alistair Warrender, was a just man," she said with emotion. "He supported several charities and promised, on numerous occasions, to provide for me, a dependent relative with no fortune of my own, but his final will, produced by Felix, left everything to my cousin. It contradicted all my uncle's sentiments. He was not a man given to sudden, unexplained changes." Holmes nodded slowly. "And when you discovered this alleged later will, you brought it to a solicitor." "I trusted Mr. Penny," she replied. "He urged caution. He said the matter was delicate. He promised to review it at once and give me his conclusions the following morning." Her voice faltered again. "When I arrived and was told he was not here, only that the police wished to question me, I feared the worst." Holmes's expression softened, but his tone remained steady. "Miss Warrender, I must ask, did anyone know you intended to bring this document to Mr. Penny?" "No," she said, "no one. Not even Sir Felix?" A faint, fearful pause preceded her reply. "I do not know, but Felix has always resented my uncle's affection for me. He knew I spent time with my uncle in the weeks before his death. He knew my uncle confided in me." "And did you confide in Felix?" Holmes pressed quietly. Her eyes widened in alarm. "Never. Felix would have destroyed the will himself if he knew it existed." Holmes resumed his measured pacing, his fingers knitting behind his back. "Miss Warrender, your candour is admirable. I must ask 2 more questions, and I beg your honesty above all else. First, when you delivered the will to Mr. Penny, was it still sealed? Yes, she answered firmly. When I found it, the wax was unbroken. He unsealed it in my presence. Holmes paused. And second, after he opened it, did you read its contents? Her eyes fell to the floor. No, she whispered. He insisted he review it alone before making any comment. I trusted him. And he promised to meet you today? Yes. Holmes exhaled very slowly, as though releasing a conclusion he had long suspected. Then the sequence becomes clear, he said quietly. You brought a will into Mr. Penny's hands, one potentially damning to your cousin. Mr. Penny examined it and perhaps confirmed its authenticity. He then arranged a private meeting in Devonshire Place with someone whose initial begins with M, someone who wanted the truth suppressed. Miss Warrender looked up sharply. The letter? The summons? You think Mr. Penny intended to meet the person contesting the will? Holmes's eyes glinted. I think, he said, that Mr. Penny intended to meet your cousin. A gasp escaped her. No, she said, shaking her head fiercely. Felix would never. He is foolish, reckless, vain, yes, but he is not capable of murder. Holmes raised a long, calming hand. I do not assert his guilt, but that does not absolve him from suspicion. Someone close to him, or close to your uncle's estate, had reason to mislead Mr. Penny and ensure his silence. Mordaunt, who had been listening with deepening distress, now spoke. Miss Warrender, can you recall anything else? Anything your uncle said, shortly, before he died? She lifted her gaze, and for the first time something like certainty glowed within it. Yes, she said softly. My uncle told me he feared betrayal. He never named Felix, but he said he was being pressed to revise his will to sign documents he did not trust. That was why he hid the final will. He feared it would be stolen. Holmes's expression sharpened. Stolen? He echoed. Just as the parcel was stolen from the man who fled the scene. Her brow furrowed. Parcel? Holmes paced once more, thoughtful and precise. A man was seen carrying a package of the same size as a folded legal document. That man fled before Mr. Penny was killed. He may have been retrieving the will or ensuring its destruction, which suggests 2 individuals were present, one fleeing, the other killing. Miss Warrender stiffened. You mean there were 2 criminals? Perhaps, Holmes said. Or one thief and one murderer, or even one victim and one pursuer. She stared at him, fear shimmering in her eyes. What must I do, Mr. Holmes? You, Miss Warrender, he said gravely, must do nothing except remain available to speak with us again, but I will do something myself. He turned sharply, his eyes alight with purpose. I shall speak with Sir Felix Warrender at once. Mordaunt caught his breath. Do you believe he will receive you? He will have no choice, Holmes said calmly. A man whose inheritance hangs by a thread is quick to entertain visitors who may pull it. He picked up his coat and hat. Come, Watson, this is no longer a matter of speculation. It is a contest of wills, quite literally, and before this day is done I shall look into the eyes of Sir Felix Warrender and determine whether he is a fool or a murderer. Miss Warrender's voice trembled. Mr. Holmes, be careful. Felix has fallen under dangerous influences, men I do not know, men my uncle mistrusted. Holmes paused at the threshold. My dear Miss Warrender, he said with a faint, reassuring smile, I make a profession of walking among dangerous men. And with that, he swept from the room, the fog outside drawing us once more into its grey, shifting fold, toward the man whose name now lay at the centre of the storm. Sir Felix Warrender resided in one of those tall, fashionably narrow houses of Bayswater whose elegance declared more ambition than stability. When our cab drew up before the wrought-iron railings, Holmes paused on the pavement with a faint, sardonic smile, as though the facade itself confirmed a theory already forming in his mind. "A gentleman living beyond his means," he murmured. "Observe the peeling gold leaf on the knocker, Watson. The cracks in the marble step, a house that wishes to speak of wealth while whispering of debt." I had scarcely time to reply before the door swung open, revealing a butler whose expression wavered between dignity and unease. "Sir Felix is at home," he admitted after Holmes presented his card, though he added in a guarded tone, "He is not receiving callers." "Nevertheless," said Holmes, brushing past him with graceful inevitability, "he will receive us." The butler, outmatched in will and surprised by Holmes's quiet authority, closed the door without protest. He led us through a hall lined with racing prints and polished boots, dozens of them meticulously arranged, the mark of a man whose vanity expressed itself through appearances. At length we were shown into a drawing-room where Sir Felix Warrender rose abruptly from a leather chair. A newspaper in his hand, its headline unmistakable. Holmes greeted him with the faintest inclination of the head. "Sir Felix, I am here to discuss the death of Mr. Arthur Penny." Warrender's reaction was not what one might expect from a man innocent or virtuous. His face blanched, and then, almost too quickly, flushed with indignation. "Mr. Penny's death is a tragedy," he said sharply, "but I fail to see what possible connection it has with me." Holmes surveyed him with calm scrutiny. Sir Felix was a handsome man in the careless way of the idle wealthy, well-dressed, impeccably groomed, but the refinement was superficial, the eyes restless, the jaw too ready to set in defiance. A faint scent of tobacco and stale spirits lingered in the air. "The connection," Holmes replied, "is one of circumstance. You dined with Mr. Penny last night. You were perhaps the last man to see him alive." Sir Felix threw the newspaper onto the table. Yes, I dined with him. Discussed business matters, then we parted ways. Are you accusing me of something?" Holmes ignored the question. He took a slow turn about the room, noting the stack of unpaid bills half concealed beneath the racing sheets, the half-empty decanter on the sideboard, the set of travel trunks against the wall. "You are preparing to leave London?" Holmes asked lightly. Warrender stiffened. "A short trip, nothing more." "Short trips," Holmes said, "are rarely planned with such haste that the trunks remain half-packed." Sir Felix's hands clenched at his sides. "Mr. Holmes, you presume too much." "I do not appreciate. On the contrary," Holmes interrupted softly, "I presume very little. For instance, I do not presume that you lured Mr. Penny to Devonshire Place with a false letter. I simply inquire why his body was found there, murdered, hours after meeting with you." Warrender's bravado faltered. He looked away toward the curtained window. "I do not know why he went there." Holmes's voice sharpened. "Did he show you a document? A will?" That struck home. Warrender's face hardened into a mask, but behind it a flicker of fear flashed unmistakably. "What will?" he said too quickly. Holmes stopped before him, and when he spoke again, the gentleness had vanished. "The revised will of your late father, the one naming Miss Amelia Warrender as a beneficiary, the one your cousin claims you suppressed." Sir Felix's breath caught. His eyes darted to the door, as though calculating the distance. Holmes did not move, but his words pressed like iron. "Mr. Penny unsealed that document yesterday morning. He confirmed its authenticity, and he meant to speak with someone before revealing it, someone with motive to destroy it." Warrender's shoulders sagged. If he truly possessed such a will, he muttered, then someone stole it, someone who stood to lose everything. Holmes lifted a brow. And who might that be? For a moment, the briefest, Warrender hesitated. Then his chin lifted. "I will not be your scapegoat," he snapped. "Yes, I saw Penny last night. No, he did not show me any will. If he intended to speak with me later, he never said so. The man had many clients, many enemies too." Holmes studied him with a penetrating stillness. "Did he appear anxious?" he asked. "Uneasy? Did he hint at danger?" Warrender blinked, taken off guard. "He was preoccupied, annoyed, perhaps. He said he had uncovered something troubling, something that required caution, but he refused to elaborate." Holmes exchanged a quiet glance with me, then turned back to Warrender. "And you, did you?" he asked softly. "Require caution?" Sir Felix swallowed. "What are you implying?" "That Mr. Penny's death," Holmes said, "benefits you more than anyone else in London." The accusation hung in the air like the toll of a distant bell. Warrender's face twisted, not with guilt, but with a terrible, simmering frustration. "You think I killed him for money?" he spat. "I may have debts, Mr. Holmes, but I am not—" He broke off abruptly as though an invisible hand had closed around his voice. Holmes leaned in, his tone softening unexpectedly. "Sir Felix," he said, "if you are innocent, then someone is using you, someone close, someone who knew of the will, who knew of Mr. Penny's involvement and who acted swiftly to recover the document or ensure its destruction." Warrender's eyes darkened with guarded suspicion. "You speak as though you know something," he murmured. "I know," Holmes replied, "that the man seen fleeing the crime carried a package of the same dimensions as a folded will. I know that two men were present, one escaping, the other waiting to strike. And I know Mr. Penny believed he was meeting someone whose name began with an M." At this, Sir Felix paled. Holmes saw it. "Who is M, Sir Felix?" he asked quietly. "In your circle, who bears that initial and has something to gain from your inheritance." For a moment, Sir Felix stood utterly still. Then, with a slow exhalation, he sank into the nearest chair as though his strength had left him. "There is only one man," he whispered. "My father's former steward, my cousin's guardian, a man my uncle trusted implicitly." He looked up, fear now unmistakable. "Montague Hale." Holmes repeated the name like a verdict. "Montague Hale," he said. "Yes, that fits perfectly." Warrender seemed to shrink into his seat. "Holmes, if Hale has done something, if he means to frame me, what am I to do?" Holmes turned toward the door, already striding with purpose. "Do?" he echoed. "You will do nothing but remain where you can be found. But Watson and I, we shall go to Montague Hale, for a man who steals a will and stages a murder behind a fabricated door does not sit idle." He paused, his silhouette framed by the cold grey light from the hall. "And if we do not find him swiftly," Holmes said, "I fear Mr. Penny will not be his last victim." The door closed behind us, leaving Sir Felix Warrender alone, pale, shaken, and very possibly the next piece on a chessboard Holmes now saw with sudden, chilling clarity. Montague Hale's name lingered in the air long after Holmes had spoken it, like the final note of a discordant chord. As we stepped back into the fog-softened streets of Bayswater, Holmes moved with renewed urgency, a rapid, purposeful stride that told me his deductions had begun to knit themselves into a coherent, if still incomplete, tapestry. "Hale," Holmes murmured under his breath as we walked. A steward to the Warrenders for more than 30 years, trusted, invisible, a man who navigates a household's finances and confidences with equal ease. Such men, Watson, if they turn their minds to villainy, become far more dangerous than common criminals. And you believe he is behind Mr. Penny's death? Holmes shook his head sharply. I believe he is involved, but we must not leap. What we know is this. Hale had access to the late Mr. Warrender's papers. He had dominated Sir Felix's affairs since youth. He stood to lose influence if Miss Warrender inherited a portion of the estate, and if he learned of a revised will. Well, he may have acted to suppress it, I finished. Precisely, and we have yet to determine whether he acted alone or with Sir Felix's knowledge. We reached the main thoroughfare, Holmes signalling a hansom cab with a swift gesture of his hand. To Chelsea, Watson, he said. Montague Hale resides there, number 14 Bathford Terrace. If he is at home, we may have our answers before dusk. The cab rattled through the busy streets and Holmes sat forward, tapping the handle of his cane against his knee in restless tempo. There is a pattern forming, he continued, half to himself. A forged meeting arranged through a letter signed M, a man emerging from a disguised structure holding the will, a second man waiting to carry out the murder. Hale is a plausible architect, but would he dirty his own hands? You think the killer and the man who fled are different people? Yes. The man Mr. Green saw was tall, moved with haste, and carried a parcel. Penny's killer struck with deliberation, precision, and cold confidence. Those traits do not always coexist. He fell silent, lost in thought until the cab turned onto a quiet street of red brick houses. Number 14 stood at the corner, respectable, plain, its curtains drawn. Holmes paid the driver and strode to the door, knocking firmly. We waited. No answer. Holmes knocked again, louder. A faint shifting sounded inside, the scrape of furniture, followed by stillness. Someone was within. Holmes's eyes gleamed. He hesitates. Good. That means fear or guilt. He rapped a third time, and at last the door opened a few inches. A thin man of rigid posture and iron-grey hair peered out. His eyes, pale, assessing, flicked from Holmes to me, then back again. Yes, he said curtly. Mr. Montague Hale? Holmes asked pleasantly. I am he. What is your business? The door remained chained, his fingers tight upon the edge. Holmes's smile did not reach his eyes. We wish to speak with you regarding the death of Mr. Arthur Penny. Hale stiffened, but only for a heartbeat. I know nothing of it. But you do, Holmes said quietly, and your reluctance to admit us proves it. The pale eyes hardened. You will leave my property at once. Holmes's voice shifted, soft, dangerous. If you prefer a constable's knock, I shall summon one, but I warn you, Mr. Hale, the constable's knock is seldom as gentle as mine. A long moment passed. Then, with glacial reluctance, Hale removed the chain and opened the door. 5 minutes, he said. No more. We stepped into a sitting room whose immaculate order spoke of a mind that found chaos intolerable. Books stood in exact rows, papers were stacked with mathematical precision. A fire burned low in the hearth, yet the room felt cold. Holmes wasted no time. Mr. Hale, your former employer, Alistair Warrender, wrote a revised will shortly before his death, a will naming Miss Amelia Warrender among the principal beneficiaries. That will was stolen. You were in a position to take it. Hale's jaw clenched. How dare you accuse me of theft? Holmes continued as though he had not spoken. Mr. Penny examined that will yesterday morning. He intended to speak with someone last night, someone whose name began with an M.U. Hale's nostrils flared, but he mastered himself with rigid calm. Mr. Holmes, if you have come merely to provoke me— Mr. Penny was murdered, Holmes said sharply. Stabbed straight through the heart moments after being lured to Devonshire Place. A man was seen fleeing with a parcel the size of a folded legal document. Another man hid behind a portable structure disguised as a door. 2 perpetrators, 1 theft, 1 murder, 1 motive. Hale's expression did not change, but his hands, clasped behind his back, tightened ever so slightly. Holmes's voice descended to a whisper. "Where is the will, Mr. Hale?" A flicker, fear, guilt, passed through the man's eyes before they steeled. "I know nothing of a revised will," he said. "Sir Felix mentioned nothing of one, nor did Mr. Penny. I was loyal to both father and son. If you believe otherwise, you are mistaken." Holmes studied him with absolute stillness, like a hawk deciding whether its prey will run. "Very well," he said at last. "If you claim innocence, you will not object to answering a question. Last night, at midnight, where were you?" "In my home," Hale replied without hesitation. "Alone?" "Yes." Holmes's lips curved slightly, not in amusement but in confirmation of a suspicion. "A convenient solitude," he murmured. Hale bristled. "I do not accept insinuations." Holmes stepped closer. "Then here is something more explicit. You knew Penny possessed the will. You knew he meant to act upon it. You feared exposure, so you—" A sudden pounding on the door below interrupted him, heavy, frantic blows that echoed through the house. Holmes turned toward the hallway. "Expecting another visitor, Mr. Hale?" Hale's face blanched for the first time. "No." The knocking intensified. "Mr. Hale, open up!" a man's voice shouted from outside. "For God's sake, open!" Holmes moved toward the staircase with the swift, silent purpose of a hunting cat. Hale followed reluctantly. I trailed them both. The front door shook under the rapid pounding. Holmes unlatched it and pulled it open. A young man lurched inside, gasping, soot-streaked. Panic-stricken, his coat was torn, his face grey with terror. "They've found it!" he cried. "They've found the door again!" Holmes froze. Hale's face went rigid. My own pulse hammered. "Where?" Holmes demanded. "In Bloomsbury," the man gasped. "A door, standing alone, just like the one from last night. A crowd's gathering. They say someone went inside, but hasn't come out." Holmes's expression sharpened into something like icy exhilaration. "Watson," he said, "the second act has begun." And without another word, he seized his coat, swept past the stunned steward and the trembling messenger, and dashed into the street. I followed at once, the fog swallowing us as London itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the mystery to open before us, once more, like a door without a house. The fog thickened as we crossed into Bloomsbury, as though the city itself sensed the uncanny repetition unfolding within its streets. Holmes moved swiftly, yet with the controlled precision of a man whose mind was arranging every possibility at lightning speed. I kept close behind him, my heart thudding with the grim knowledge that whatever awaited us ahead was no accident, no coincidence, but the deliberate continuation of a deadly game. We turned into a narrow street where a growing crowd had gathered, students from the nearby colleges, errand boys, clerks, and a handful of constables who were doing their best to keep order. Their lanterns swung in the mist, casting wavering circles of dim light across the cobblestones. "There it is!" someone shouted. "Just like the one from Holborn!" Holmes cut through the crowd, and I followed to the cordoned-off space at its heart. There, standing absurd and solitary in the middle of the pavement, was a door. The very same design described by Mr. Green, a dark green frame, a brass lion's head knocker, and a frosted fanlight above. It stood without support of any kind, without wall or frame, without even a shadow to moor it to earthly architecture. And once again the fog seemed to recede from it, as though unwilling to touch the thing. Holmes stopped several paces away, his profile etched sharp against the dim glow of a constable's lantern. "It is as I suspected," he murmured. "Replicated, relocated, and deployed with precision." A constable approached us, his expression grim. "Mr. Holmes, sir, thank the Lord you're here. A man went inside. We've not heard a sound since." "Describe him," Holmes said, eyes fixed on the door. "Couldn't see his face in the fog."
But he weren't one of the locals. Tall, moving as though he was expected. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Expected by whom? The constable shook his head helplessly. Holmes stepped forward, but not too close. He circled the structure, examining its edges, its base, the faint impression it made upon the stones. He crouched briefly, passing his finger along the pavement. "A dolly wheel again," he whispered. "They moved it here no more than an hour ago." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Holmes, what purpose could it serve now? The will is missing, the killer's fled. Why risk producing this monstrosity again? Holmes rose slowly. "Because, Watson, the play is not over. And this—" He gestured at the solitary door, and as both lure and message. At that moment, the door moved, just slightly. A tremor, as though a breath of wind stirred it.
The crowd gasped, the constables stiffened, but Holmes alone stepped closer, his gaze intense, alert. "Not wind," he said sharply. "Someone touched it from within." One of the constables reached for the handle of his truncheon. Holmes raised a hand. "No one approaches. That is exactly what they want." The door creaked again, its hinges groaning with unnatural slowness. Holmes's voice lowered to a murmur only I could hear. "Someone is inside, but not the man who entered moments ago. That man is already dead or silenced." Before I could speak, the door swung open. The interior was black as pitch, just as Mr. Green had described. No lamplight reflected off any surface. It swallowed light whole. Then something emerged, a hand. It shook violently, groping as though for escape. The rest of the figure came lurching forward, first shoulders, then a pale face contorted in terror. The man staggered from the threshold and collapsed onto the pavement. The crowd shrieked. The constables rushed forward, but Holmes was faster, kneeling beside the fallen man. "Alive," Holmes declared, "but close to collapse." The man's lips trembled, his eyes rolled desperately toward Holmes. "They're inside," he croaked. "Two of them. They said he hadn't done it properly, said they'd make sure this time." "Who?" Holmes demanded. "Give me names." The man convulsed, clutching at Holmes's sleeve. "One, all dark coat, called the other Hale?" "Montague Hale." Before Holmes could ask more, the man stiffened, gasped once, and fell unconscious, not dead, but too far gone to speak further. Holmes stood and addressed the nearest constable. "Get this man to a doctor at once. Keep him under guard. No one speaks to him until I return." "Yes, sir." The constables lifted the man and hurried him away. Holmes turned back to the door, his face a mask of cold fury. "Hale is inside," I whispered. "Hale," Holmes agreed. "And likely the killer who struck down Arthur Penny. They have returned to destroy evidence, or to silence one last witness." The door stood open now, swaying slightly. Darkness yawned inside. Holmes approached it with the measured caution of a man assessing a trap. "They expect no intrusion," he said. "Why would they? Their disguise confounds the police, and their previous witness was dismissed as delusional." He stopped at the threshold, examining the interior without crossing over. "Holmes," I said softly, "if they are armed." "I assume they are," he replied.
"I do not intend to enter blindly." He turned abruptly. "Watson, fetch the nearest lamplighter's pole or any stick of sufficient length." I hurried to the edge of the street where lamplighters maintained their tools. Within moments I returned with a long pole. Holmes took it, weighed it briefly, then extended it over the threshold into the darkness. Nothing. He swept it left and right. A metallic clang answered. Holmes's eyes flashed. As I suspected, the interior is not an empty void, it is a box, a structure, a disguise. He turned to the constables. They have built a chamber within this false door, a movable killing room. Stand ready. At my signal, close in. But Mr. Holmes, no questions. Prepare yourselves. Then Holmes stepped to the threshold again and raised his voice. Hale, he called. Montague Hale.
This is Sherlock Holmes. I know you are inside, and I know why you killed Mr. Penny. Silence. Holmes continued, his tone ringing through the street. That was your first mistake. Your second was returning to the scene of your crime. Still nothing. Holmes inhaled deeply and then thrust the lamplighter's pole sharply into the darkness. A shout answered from within, followed by movement, rapid footsteps, and then the unmistakable sound of a knife scraping against wood. Constables, Holmes snapped. They're escaping out the back. The structure opens in 2 directions. The crowd exploded into motion. Constables surged around the sides of the false door, disappearing into the fog-draped alley beyond. Holmes darted after them, not recklessly but with astonishing speed. "Watson!" he called. "They planned a second escape. Keep close." I obeyed at once, my blood pounding as we plunged into the alley behind the structure. 2 figures were running ahead, one tall, one compact, silhouetted against the pale glow of a distant street lamp. Holmes pointed. "The tall one is Hale, the other, the killer." Ahead, the fugitives split. "Hale takes the right," Holmes shouted. "The killer goes left. Watson, after Hale." Without hesitation, I gave chase, heart hammering, breath burning, feet pounding the stones as Montague Hale vanished deeper into the coils of fog. Behind me, I heard Holmes's voice like a whip crack. "Stop, in the name of the law!" And then the echo of pursuit swallowed everything as the night erupted into a dangerous, breathless hunt. The game, its final act, had begun. The fog curled around me as I dashed after Montague Hale, his silhouette flickering like a phantom against the dimming lamps. The man ran with surprising agility for his age. Fear, I have found, lends strength where the body falls short. My boots struck the stones with hard, echoing blows, yet the fog muffled all else. Hale glanced back once, and in that fleeting instant our eyes met, his wild with desperation, mine fixed with grim resolve. A sudden turn carried us into a narrower lane. Hale stumbled, recovered, but the hesitation cost him. I closed the distance. With a final leap I lunged, grasping the back of his coat. He twisted violently, but exhaustion betrayed him, and we crashed together onto the pavement. The blow knocked the breath from us both. Hale struggled, but his resistance was half-hearted. He was spent. "Let me go," he gasped. "You don't understand. He'll kill us both." But before he could name the second man, heavy footfalls approached. A constable rounded the corner, lantern in hand, and with his help we hauled Hale to his feet. The man sagged between us, trembling. "Holmes?" I asked, breathlessly. "Pursuing the other," the constable replied. "We heard him shouting directions." We marched Hale back toward the false door, now surrounded by a wider ring of officers and onlookers. The structure loomed ominously in the mist, its panels rattling like the outer shell of some monstrous cocoon. Holmes emerged moments later from the alley opposite, guiding a second man before him, a younger fellow with a narrow face, the sort easily lost in any crowd. His left sleeve was torn where Holmes had no doubt seized him. Holmes's coat was dusty, his breath brisk, but his eyes shone with that unmistakable glint of triumph. "Excellent work, Watson," he said, as though we were merely returning from a brisk afternoon stroll. "You kept Hale from slipping the net." The rest was inevitable. The constables secured both prisoners. Hale's earlier defiance had collapsed into a haunted stillness. The younger man, the one who had wielded the knife, glared with a predator's fury, yet said nothing. Holmes turned to the inspector on scene. "Place them apart. Hale will break long before the other." We stepped aside as the police dispersed the crowd. The door, now understood to be a movable chamber, stood open, revealing its construction. Wooden panels bolted to a dolly frame with a small interior space just large enough for concealment or ambush. Holmes surveyed it with cold precision. "A clever contraption," he mused, "designed to mystify onlookers and provide a staging ground for murder, but even the cleverest illusions fail under repeated performance." Montague Hale, now seated on the steps nearby, with wrists bound, stared at Holmes with hollow eyes. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he whispered. "Penny wasn't meant to die." Holmes approached him slowly. "But he did. Because you panicked, because you let greed and fear outweigh judgment, and because your associate here," he nodded toward the younger man, "had neither the patience nor the intelligence required for subtlety." Hale's face crumpled. He said the will would ruin everything, that Felix would be left destitute, that all my years of loyalty would count for nothing. "And so," Holmes added, "you stole the revised will. You sent the letter summoning Penny."
You brought your man to do the killing, should persuasion fail. The younger man spat on the ground. "He begged us not to, said he'd keep quiet, and you believed him?" Holmes replied sharply. "A solicitor? Bound by law and conscience, Penny would never have kept silent, nor would Miss Warrender." Hale trembled. It wasn't supposed to end like this." "No crime ever is," Holmes said, his tone almost mournful. "But once you interfered with a man's last testament, the rest followed like falling dominoes." Inspector Lestrade arrived, breath steaming in the cold night. "Holmes," he said, "the man you and the constables rescued is stable. He says Hale and the other fellow dragged him inside that thing, threatened him to destroy evidence, then left him for dead when he resisted." Holmes nodded. Their courage faltered.
"Good." Lestrade motioned to the prisoners. "We'll take them in. The yard will have enough to hold them, and more, once Miss Warrender gives her statement." Hale's voice rose suddenly, desperation breaking through. "What about Felix? He knew nothing. I hid the will before he ever learned of it. I thought, if I preserved his inheritance, he would be grateful, that he would keep me." Holmes regarded him with a steady gaze. "You stole from him," he said. "You lied to him, and you killed a man to protect him from a truth he had a right to know. You cared not for Sir Felix. You cared for your influence over him." Hale slumped, defeated. Holmes stepped back as the constables led both criminals away. The street slowly emptied, the mist reclaiming its quiet dominion. We remained beneath a flickering lamp as Holmes watched the door being dismantled by the police. "A curious case, Holmes," I said softly. "The door, the deception, the will. It is remarkable how all the pieces fell into place." Holmes's expression softened. "It is human folly, Watson, that builds the most elaborate puzzles. Hale feared irrelevance more than disgrace. His associate feared poverty more than law. Between them, they contrived a scheme worthy of any theatre stage. And Sir Felix? Guilty of arrogance and negligence," Holmes said, "but not murder. He will face embarrassment, perhaps scandal, but justice will spare him the fate intended by his steward." Holmes adjusted his coat collar against the chill. "I shall deliver Miss Warrender her uncle's final wishes." "Thanks to your quick pursuit." Hale confessed the location before the constables took him away. "The will survives. And her future will change entirely," I observed. As do all futures touched by truth, Holmes replied. We walked in silence for a moment before he continued, voice low and contemplative. This case, Watson, is a reminder that the strangest mysteries often spring from the most ordinary vices: greed, fear, ambition. Wrap them in fog, place them behind a door without a house, and the world cries supernatural, when in truth the explanation is all too human. I smiled at him. And yet, Holmes, without you, the world would still be staring at a phantom door. His eyes glimmered faintly in the gaslight. No, he said. The world would simply have looked away. As we turned toward Baker Street, leaving behind the disassembled door and the thinning fog, Holmes added with a hint of his old, dry humour, "And now, Watson, let us hope Mrs. Hudson has left the fire in good order. I find murder exceedingly exhausting." I laughed, reflecting, as I often did, that Sherlock Holmes, in all his brilliance and contradictions, remained as singular a phenomenon as any door standing alone on a London street. The night swallowed us gently, and the case of the door that opened without a house closed at last, its shadows dispelled, its secrets laid bare beneath the relentless, illuminating logic of Sherlock Holmes.